From Recorded Future News and PRX, this is Click Here. When was the last time you were in Ukraine?
A little over a week ago.
This is Evelyn Farkas, the executive director of the McCain Institute. It's a nonpartisan organization dedicated to democracy and human rights. During the Obama administration, Evelyn was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia. She was also a senior advisor to the Supreme Allied Commander Europe. So she's been to Ukraine dozens of times. But this last trip, she said, felt different. So was it pretty grim while you were there?
I won't lie, it was pretty grim. Now, I will say, Dina, that the Ukrainian people remain determined to stand up for their sovereignty. They remain determined to become members of the European Union and have a better economic system and more prosperity, to defend their democracy, to be a democratic nation, and to join NATO.
I'm Dina Temple-Raston, and this is Click Here's Mic Drop, an extended cut of an interview we think you'd like to hear more of. This time last year, we were in Ukraine reporting about technology in the war. Ukraine is the first truly hybrid war the world has ever seen. And today, given all the discussion about Ukraine in the run-up to the Trump administration, we sat down with Evelyn to get a read on what to expect. President-elect Trump says he can end the war in 24 hours, but he didn't say much about how exactly he'd do that.
So Trump said on Fox News that he was going to say to Zelensky, you have to make a deal. And then he'd say to Putin, say, if you don't make a deal, we're going to give Zelensky everything he wants. Is that what you think's going to happen?
I mean, there's something to that.
Take a listen. I'm Dina Temple-Raston, and this is Click Here's Mic Drop. Back in September, when President Trump was still a candidate, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was in the U.S., trying to drum up support for the war, and the two made time to meet in New York, at Trump Tower.
We're going to have a good meeting today. And I think the fact that we're even together today is a very good sign.
It was the first in-person encounter between the two men since 2019, and there wasn't much of a readout about what they discussed. What we do know is that Trump has made no secret about not wanting to continue providing military and financial aid to Ukraine. So I asked Evelyn Farkas what she thought they talked about, and what she thinks Zelensky's strategy will be with the new President Trump.
I think President Zelensky understood, okay, this is a president who's really transactional. He's going to be thinking about what's in it for me. So he did reference the fact that Ukraine has mineral deposits. I believe they have lithium that would be important for U.S. industry and U.S. national security. President Zelensky would probably also appeal to President Trump's desire not to be a loser.
Тому я вважаю, що війна...
I believe that the war will end, and it will not end in the abstract, but there's no exact date. However, the war will end faster with the policy of the team that will now lead the White House.
The United States has been backing Ukraine since 2014, and I think if President Zelensky were clever, he would try to talk about victory, not just for Ukraine, but victory for President Trump. How does President Trump achieve a victory that the world will regard as a victory, not that only President Putin would regard as a victory?
When we sat down with Evelyn, she'd just returned from a trip to Kyiv. She's been there dozens of times, all the way back to 1993.
I have never seen the Ukrainian officials and civil society leaders this tired and, frankly, this direct about their lack of sufficient manpower. And I mean not just on the front, but sort of across society. The losses on the battlefield, the losses due to temporary or permanent immigration have, added up.
They've lowered the age of the draft to 25 years old, and they'll probably need to lower it again, though she said that's politically fraught.
So there are things that Ukraine can do, frankly, to address the manpower issue on the front. The manpower issue, however, across society, that one is urgent, and they do need help with that.
What do you mean by manpower issue across society?
Meaning that they don't have enough qualified people to, frankly, populate the government at various levels. They don't have just enough people with the right expertise. Many of the most expert, capable people, of course, mostly women, but some men left the country or they're at the front.
Evelyn said the increased stress on the country could not just be felt, but literally heard.
And the interesting thing was, a year ago, you may recall, at that point, there were no attacks on Kyiv. There were no sirens and missile or drone attacks.
Very few.
Yeah, but exactly.
There were some when we were there, but they were pretty isolated.
Yeah, but when we were there this past, again, I think it was May, it was a completely different story. And I had my first, going down to the bomb shelter experience. This time, it was so bad that we just ignored it because we wouldn't have been able to make our meetings. So we just said, okay, if it's really bad, our security guys will come and pull us out of the debris.
After more than 1,000 days of war, Ukraine remains as committed as ever, not just to fight for its democracy, but to join Europe in the EU and become part of NATO.
Those are all things that they view as existential goals for them, but they just are tired of having to fight and feeling like they don't have the same level of support among their partners as Vladimir Putin does.
What appeared intended to be a quick conquest turned into a long and bloody war. Moscow has been forced to supplement its military with new conscripts to sustain the fight.
Over the past couple of years, Iran has provided weapons to Russia for the war. North Korea has too. And now some 10,000 North Korean soldiers are fighting beside Russian soldiers in Kursk, the Russian border region that Ukraine captured back in August. Evelyn said that the Ukrainians see Russia's allies stepping up, and they want their allies to step up too.
They would like their partners, us and the Europeans and the Asians who are supporting them, to provide more support. And of course, they're jealous of the fact that Russians can get other countries to, in other states, basically, to provide military personnel to the battlefield.
Whatever support the United States is currently providing. That, of course, could all change come January.
Marco Rubio is likely to be Trump's Secretary of State, and he's praised the Ukrainians and said that the problem is we're funding a stalemate.
Now, that doesn't mean that we celebrate what Vladimir Putin did or are excited about it, but I think there has to also be some common sense here, and that is that right now what we are funding is a stalemate that's costing lives and, putting Ukraine, it's going to take 100 years to rebuild that poor country with everything they are facing.
Is he wrong?
Well, I think at a certain moment in time, you can say it looks like a stalemate, but I think it's too simplistic to say we're funding a stalemate. I mean, we're funding Ukraine in its quest to maintain its sovereignty, not be colonized, recolonized again by the Russian Federation. And they are not necessarily losing, so a stalemate is not a bad thing. In the sense that they're not losing. A stalemate indefinitely, of course, is a problem. But the fight for Ukraine is so important because if Vladimir Putin gets his way in Ukraine, number one, it will embolden Vladimir Putin to continue to try to regain former Soviet states like Moldova. Georgia, he's effectively taken over using political means. He will then probably try to probe NATO states.
What do you think a likely settlement, if there is one, would look like if Trump is going to force the hand?
If he forces the hand, I don't see any way out that doesn't include some kind of security guarantee for Ukraine. I don't know how they would think it was safe or fair. And so I think the prerequisite is either a hardcore bilateral security agreement or NATO membership. And frankly, the NATO members are all ready, from what I understand, meaning they would now, maybe Hungary's an exception, but they would now accept Ukraine as a NATO member. So I think NATO membership would be critical. And then other than that, I think that President Zelensky would probably be, I can't speak for him or the Ukrainian people, but I think if they had to trade some land, they may find a way to do it so that it doesn't seem permanent. But if that's the deal they have to make, they might make it because they could save the rest of their country and they could save their democracy.
So it would be, you can stay there for now, we'll discuss.
Yeah, or you pretend that you're, okay, fine, Russia can have it, but there's an asterisk. So sometime in the future, it could be revisited. I think what's become clear now is that Ukraine could use a ceasefire, even if it's not a permanent ceasefire. They could use the opportunity to rebuild. Of course, that goes both ways. Putin could use it as well. So I think that they're looking at that. The problem is, of course, that is, again, a ceasefire without a real security guarantee, like a bilateral U.S. security guarantee, similar to the one that we give Japan and Republic of Korea, or a real NATO membership, either one of those security guarantees. Without one of those types of security guarantees, it's only a ceasefire, especially with Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin. If there were a change of government in Russia, a government that wasn't, imperial or neo-imperial, then it might be a different situation. But nobody's going to trust Vladimir Putin not to try again.
Do you think that leaving the Kursk region is going to be a prerequisite for Russia to come to the table?
It might be.
Kursk is where North Korean and Russian soldiers are fighting right now.
But I think the Ukrainians they've telegraphed that they've signaled that they're willing to do that. President Zelensky called it a bargaining chip. He said, we're not trying to acquire new territory. So, but I think he definitely sees it as a bargaining chip. So if they can hold on to it, it is clever. The question is, can they hold on to it? It seems they don't have a ton of good options. And the Kursk situation, while that was a good gamble and yielded them some advantages, at least for a certain amount of time, now they're going to really have to figure out what to do in that case. So I think, I don't know that we're going to see them take the initiative again, but on the battlefield or elsewhere, but you never know, because
Evelyn said whatever the Trump administration decides to do, whether it's to give them aid or not give them aid or force them to negotiate, we won't see it have an effect right away.
If Trump comes in January 20th and ends aid, how does that manifest itself on the battlefield and within Ukraine itself?
Well, it won't manifest itself on the battlefield immediately because, of course, our U.S. government is providing as much as possible. And the Biden administration has been pretty clear. I don't know if they said this publicly, but certainly privately, they're trying to move everything as fast as possible into Ukraine. It takes so long after the money's dispersed and everyone agrees, Congress and the president, to provide, X package of equipment to the Ukrainians to actually get it into the theater, into the battlefield. They are trying to accelerate that as much as possible.
A few days after our discussion with Evelyn, President Biden did an about-face and gave Ukraine permission to use U.S. weapons to strike targets far inside Russia. Previously, Ukraine could only use the missiles along the border. Zelensky didn't waste any time.
The Kremlin says Ukraine has fired U.S.-supplied long-range missiles at a military facility inside Russia.
The missiles targeted a military installation in the Bryansk region in the early hours of Tuesday morning. Not long after, President Vladimir Putin lowered Russia's threshold for when it is justified in using nuclear weapons. While it was a long-planned move, the timing was designed to make it look like the Kremlin could respond aggressively to the Ukrainian strikes. The assumption has been that under Trump, Ukraine will fare worse, that Trump will end financial and military aid. But Evelyn says with Biden as a lame duck president, there may be more options on the table. Trump wants to get both sides to negotiate.
I think that there are a lot of options now for people that they didn't have before, perhaps. I think things might have been much more frozen, if you will, or in the stalemate phase, politically, economically, and militarily. So now there's a little more leeway for Ukraine and, frankly, also the Europeans to do what they think they need to do to help Ukraine.
You're not as negative as I thought you were going to be.
Well, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm concerned, but I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I do think that the Ukrainians need a deal, but I always have to see, I always believe that eventually right prevails and the Ukrainians are in the right.
And don't count them out yet.
Don't count them out. Don't ever count them out. We counted them out last summer, remember? I mean, we've counted them out. So we counted them out in February 2022. You know, we've counted them out so many times. Don't count them out.
From Recorded Future News, this has been Click Here's Mic Drop. It was written and produced by Erica Gaida, Megan Dietrich, Sean Powers, and me, Dina Temple-Raston. It was edited by Karen Duffin. We'll be back on Tuesday with an all-new episode of Click Here. Have a great weekend.